Next to learning the various ways of hitting the ball, it's essential to develop as early as possible fundamental coordinative abilities. Without these, no systematic and long-term improvement in technique is possible. First of all, there is the ability to orientate, which means learning to concentrate optimally and consistently on several and varying stimuli, combining with this learning to be ready for fast reactions, even to unexpected situations. You run beside the hoop and pass the ball through the hoop. This means that the two boys have to concentrate on the hoop, the ball and the partner simultaneously. The yellow balloon is to be struck with the foot, the blue one with the racket. The shorter the intervals, the more highly developed orientation abilities need to be. The same applies to dealing with varying objects. This exercise demands both well-developed orientation and ability to hit the ball. These exercises train orientation even from difficult and unusual angles. Eyes concentrate first on the flying racket, then on the ball. In order not to become disorientated, the player here has to concentrate both on the ball and the position of his partner in order to throw the racket to him accurately. And this is how such an exercise can be transferred to the tennis court. Through appropriate training, young players can be systematically taught to deal with the complex orientation challenges they will face in tennis. The second essential coordinative skill is the ability to recognize the changing stages of a game and then react in the right way. This is called differentiating. In this exercise, ambidexterity and regulating physical effort are called for. The ability to differentiate means learning to choose between different ways of handling the ball and also deciding on how and how hard a ball is to be struck in any given situation. Such ambidextrous exercises not only avoid a one-sided approach, but serve as a basis for later exercises designed specifically for tennis. Now, all of you try to toss a ball into the trolley. In this exercise, the player has to vary the direction and how hard he strikes the ball. That applies equally here.
Spiel den Ball jetzt ab.
Now hit the ball into the air, alternating between the right and left hand. Encouraging ambidexterity is also part of basic coordinative training.
Und jetzt mit Handwechsel.
And now switch the racket from one hand to the other. This means that the player has to keep adapting to different rackets. The use of various kinds of balls improves the ability to differentiate. This also applies to playing with different rackets. Such complex exercises bring together many aspects of differentiation, adapting and reacting to constantly changing partners, to new kinds of rackets, and to varying flight and bounce characteristics of balls. A further important coordinative basic is the ability to keep the right balance in constantly changing phases of a game, thus enabling one to find the perfect position and to hit a winner. The ability to balance is essential on all surfaces, but particularly on clay. Here too there are attractive forms of play and training which are both challenging and fun. Most of these exercises look easier than they are. The ability to balance can be trained both on firm and wobbly surfaces. It's only when a player can successfully balance his body that he'll be able to play the ball in a controlled manner. Circular and regular pedal movements here have to be coordinated with holding the ball up. No easy task. This exercise calls for good balance and body control. At the same time, orientation and ball control. This coordinative exercise is extremely difficult.
Spielt euch jetzt den Ball direkt zu.
Now play the ball to each other directly.
Und jetzt mit aufspringen.
And now bounce it. On clay, sliding to the ball is a necessary skill for all players. And this is how it can be practiced in the gym. Particularly in top tennis, players draw gusts of amazement through unbelievably fast reactions, especially to unexpected shots. The ability to react fast can be schooled with simple exercises. The faster the ball is thrown, the quicker the player has to react. The goalie game with softballs helps to speed up reactions and prepares the way for volleying.
Versucht jetzt den Ball möglichst...
Try to get to the ball before the second bounce. This is how fast reactions to short and low balls are inculcated. Only the player who anticipates and moves is going to reach the ball before the bounce. This exercise is much nearer the real thing. The player behind has to react to the actions of his partner. The ability to synchronize is the final coordinative skill we shall be discussing. This manifests itself in good leg work and running, and equally in smooth, synchronized strokes. Training for a good sense of rhythm cannot begin early enough.
Wir versuchen jetzt in einem bestimmten Rhythmus...
Right, now we're going to run over the hoops in a special rhythm. I'll start, you follow.
Rechts, links, rechts, links, rechts. Und erste.
Okay, let's begin, off you go. Such training is as important for serving as for normal strokes, but applies just as much to synchronizing leg and arm movements.
Beim nächsten
Yes,
Versuch...
good. Now run over the hoops one step in and one step outside.
Rechts, links, rechts, links, rechts, links, rechts, links, rechts. Und erste.
And away. Good leg work is the basis for all strokes in tennis. Again, early starting is essential to train fast and synchronized leg movements. Now this time 2 steps in and 2 steps between the hoops. That was fine. The last exercise is the most difficult. 2 steps in and 1 between the hoops.
Und los. Und los.
This leg exercise is extremely difficult to coordinate rhythmically.
Die nächsten versuche jetzt das Bein
Now keep one leg in the hoop.
Ihr versucht gleichzeitig einen Ball
And
zu
now
gewinnen.
try to bounce the ball as well. All these are new and challenging exercises to improve leg work. The rolling ball determines running rhythm and the moment the ball is taken. Such techniques are only implemented successfully if the player synchronizes the speed of the ball with his leg movements. The byhander very simply helps train correct leg work, encouraging optimal and smooth movements. At the same time, orientation skills are being instilled. Finally, the complete body movement of a player has to be shadowed, so to speak, to assimilate the overall rhythm of the game. Each player has to adjust his movements to the strokes of his partner.
So, es geht um Koordination,
guys.
um Ganzkörperkoordination,
Coordination and a feeling for the ball.
Vor allem um das Ballgefühl,
Bringing racket and ball together
Schläger und Ball
with
zusammenzubringen,
total body coordination
Körper mit
involving both the
und
right and left sides of the body.
Körpers, auch auf der linken Seite des Körpers, wir werden es also auch mit der rechten
And both the
und
right
auch mit der
and left
linken.
hand will be used.
Okay, los geht's.
Okay, let's go.
Also fängt langsamer
This
an.
exercise sharpens several coordinative skills, synchronizing, differentiating, and rhythm.
Den Kopf oben halten, lass den Kopf nicht runter, lass den Kopf oben, so wie du bei
Here it's
später bei den
essential that the
Tennisschlägen
players
auch
keep
machst.
moving, that they take the ball at all heights, and that they take it gently, whatever the
Ein
speed.
bisschen Schwierigkeiten zu bringen, auch höher. Schön. Ja, ja. Sehr gut.
Good.
Bewegt euch, bewegt euch.
Move, move, shift your legs.
Beine, Beine,
Legs, legs.
Jawohl. So, versucht das jetzt mit
This
der
exercise
Rückhandseite.
has to be done using the backhand, which is much more difficult.
Abzufangen und auch hier zu werfen. Das wird ihr sehen, das ist wahrscheinlich ein bisschen schwieriger. Macht nichts, wenn der Ball am
It doesn't
Anfang
matter if the
ab
ball
und zu
sometimes
aufspringt
bounces to
oder
start with,
abspringt vom Schläger.
or bounces
Versucht
off
ihn
the
sofort
racket.
wieder zu fangen
Try to
und
catch
dann
it
wegwerfen.
again and pass it on.
Ja. So, nimmt bitte jetzt die linke Hand.
Super, and now use the left hand, put the racket in the
als
left hand,
und
and
den
pass
Schläger in die
left.
linke Hand und es geht links. Jawohl.
With children, it's very important that coordination training should always include exercises for both sides of the body.
Gut macht ihr das.
The next exercise not only trains coordinative skills, but orientation as well. The ball is once more taken gently, but is then passed on to the other player round the body.
Doppelkontakt, die nächste Übung. Versucht
The next exercise involves a double contact, so try to do it well.
Die gleiche Entfernung zu spielen.
Hit the ball in the right direction and distance to your partner as consistently as possible. Okay, start now.
Ja, immer in die
Right,
gleiche
keep
Entfernung
the same
so
distance.
und versucht ihn schön zuzuspielen. Und wieder, bewegt die Beine, bewegt euch dabei. Ja, kämpft dabei, bewegt euch, nicht stehen. So, und jetzt versucht mal ganz was Neues und ihr werdet mit der
Now
einen
something
Hand
quite new.
abfangen, den
You take the
Schläger
ball
in
with
die
the one
andere
hand,
Hand
switch
wechseln
the
und
racket
mit
to the
der
other,
anderen Hand zuspielen.
and now play it back with the other hand.
Okay.
This again trains ambidexterity.
Okay, reicht, Jungs?
Okay, that's enough, guys.
Eine neue Übung.
Now we'll do something new,
Die ist ein
a
bisschen
slightly more
schwieriger.
difficult exercise.
Ihr werdet
This
mit der
time you'll
Hand
take the ball with the
annehmen,
right hand,
und dann
move it to the
über
left
den
side of the
Ball zur
body,
linken Körperseite und hinter
and
den
then
Körper
hit the
versuchen,
ball from behind the body back to your partner. Once again a double contact. Right, let's go.
Guckt mich an.
Watch
Ich
how
mache
I do it.
Hopp, hopp.
Yes, that's it.
Ja, hopp, hopp. Und so müssen wir
That's
das
how you
Zweite
must do
machen.
it.
Ja, hinter dem Körper.
Behind
so,
the
los
body.
geht's. Hopp.
Off we go. Once again, orientation and synchronization skills are being trained. To start with, the ball is bounced several times. Later on, it should be possible to do this exercise hitting the ball just twice.
Gut, stopp.
Great, that's
So,
enough.
und jetzt machen wir es noch.
And now we're going to make it
Und
even
jetzt
more
machen wir es
complicated.
zwischen den Beinen. Beide Beine
You
werden
must play the ball from
Okay?
between your legs. Both legs stay on the ground. Okay, let's begin. In all these exercises, it's important to ensure that the players keep moving, because the ability to react to a given situation comes from footwork.
Okay?
Another way of training coordination is the half volley. To start with, it's enough if the player manages to get his racket to the ball on the bounce.
Und nächster. Los geht's. Schupp.
Later, it has to be returned over the net. Then struck in prescribed directions. And finally, the volley has to be angled to specific points.
Los geht's.
In addition to skills already mentioned, here balancing, adapting and reacting are being learnt. As technique improves, the player will be expected to take the balls coming from various angles so that he has to orientate and move appropriately in all directions. These pictures underline the importance of fast and perfect leg work.
Sehr gut. Nächster. So, und jetzt machen wir das noch schwieriger.
And now we're going to make it
Alle
even
Vorhand
harder.
Fußball spielen.
You now have to play
Ihr
each
müsst
ball
euch
with a
sehr schnell
forehand
links und
volley.
rechts bewegen. Auch wenn ich euch
You'll
den
have to
Rückhand
move
spiele,
fast, left and right, even if I play to the backhand.
Okay? Also hin und
Forehand,
her, schnelle
volley,
Fußball.
half volley. Okay, right, get moving. With other variations, things get more and more
So,
difficult.
los geht's.
The length of all the exercises shown here should be between 20 and 60 seconds and include 5 to 12 repeats. Depending on age and performance level, they can be carried out again in series of 3 to 6. To begin with, speed of movement should not be too fast. Later, this can be accelerated to match play speed or individual maximum.
Sehr gut. Komm. Gut, Ball weg. Nächster.
It's essential there should be no strain on the central nervous system. For that reason, adequate breaks between the series or between the individual exercises are enormously important.
Nächster. Bravo. So, eine weitere Übung.
Right, boys.
Schwierig,
Another
koordinativ.
exercise difficult
Ballvolley
to
mit dem
coordinate.
Körper spielen.
A half volley behind the body, like this.
Müsst ihr viel mit
You
dem
need
Körper
to swing
drehen
round with the body, okay?
und viel bewegen mit den Beinen. Weil
And
das
keep the legs
unterschiedlich
moving.
ist.
Because I'll be hitting the balls to you from various angles. Here we go. This exercise is very difficult. Here in particular, apart from other coordinative skills, the ability to orientate and adapt is trained. There are many ways of achieving this.
Gut, nächster.
We now demonstrate 3 forms of exercise. First, a half volley round the back. A half volley played through the legs is more tricky. Most difficult of all is a combination of all three. Now lads, another difficult exercise. To deal with a lob, you have to use a reverse half volley. You'll certainly have seen top-class players doing this in matches. Okay, it looks like this. The implementation of reverse half volley to deal with a lob notches up a further degree of difficulty. Rarely do players succeed straight away. This particular exercise is designed to train all coordinative abilities and is suited for all ages and levels of performance. At a later stage, one can demand from the player that in spite of his backward orientation, he can still volley the balls to specific sections of the court. Tennis volleyball is a coordinating game which motivates strongly by its competitive aspect. The ball has to be played twice on each side before being hit to the other side. The ball may not be struck down from above. Points are scored by well-placed shots. This exercise becomes more difficult when the volley shot over the net has to be struck from behind the body. This means that the ball coming from one's partner must be very accurate. For this exercise, both players have to constantly switch from volley to half volley. This is an extremely demanding exercise. It trains coordinative abilities at the upper part of the body and the rump. Legs play very little part here. This form of exercise was introduced at the beginning of the 70s at the Bundesleistungszentrum, the Federal Training Center in Hanover. It was brought in as a coordinative exercise for all courses and training seminars. Boris Becker, who also learned this exercise in Hanover, was the first to practice this way of reaching the ball at the net in a match. And that is how the famous Becker dive came into being. It's important that players roll, starting on the right shoulder. If trainers and players follow the suggestions in this film commissioned by the German Tennis Federation, they will build a broad, coordinated basis for systematic and long-term improvement in their performance in tennis especially, but also in all other sports.
Competition is a powerful motive force for tennis passion among youngsters. It represents not only a source of emulation, but it also builds character. However, there is also a negative side to competition. Playing matches on courts designed for adults, under 12 boys and girls, do not always play the same game as the champions serving as their role models. The court is too large for under 12 players, and balls bounce too high. They're forced too often to step back, jump, hit the ball above the shoulder level. They discovered that their most effective tactics are defensive strokes. This results in a dilemma for you, the coach. Should you allow young players to express themselves and learn to win by adapting their strokes to the occasion? Or should you compel them to learn the correct technical strokes, which they may not be able to use right away? Should they be free to develop their combative qualities, or should they, at an age when their motor functions are most flexible, acquire the basic technique and learn the game's vocabulary and syntax? These tools should allow them later to express their talent in their own style with their unique means diverging from the basic technical rules if needed. Letting them adopt extreme grips, even if these are optimal to hit balls with high bounces, can seriously handicap their future volley game. Should character and height otherwise predestine them to become attacking players? And the future can come quickly, driven by spectacular height changes, most often taking place between the ages of 11 and 12. As players grow rapidly, it becomes more difficult to modify their strokes, which makes it critical for them to acquire solid technical bases very early. It would therefore be a pity to opt against a technical intervention which would structure the player's adult strokes for fear of disturbing the child's confidence and acquired skills, or by dreading to undertake the long and difficult work required. Each player's case is obviously different. We can try, however, to draw some limits, indicate some references, and note key points. It will be up to you, as coach, to know how to use these guidelines appropriately. Let's begin with the serve. At the highest level, the serve has become the most critical deterrent weapon for all champions, especially those 6'1" and taller. Due to height and players' athletic maturity, aces are numerous, even on clay. Since boys and girls develop into teenagers at different ages, The serve is not always a weapon. You'll more often talk of missed returns rather than winning serves. Even if an under-12 player hardly wins points with his serve, he can, however, learn early the general structure of the stroke. This is why, starting at age 11, it's important to instill a simple serve stroke in which the racket head easily finds its natural acceleration, without necessarily relying on muscular strength. The grip must be a real serve grip, a continental grip. The player's stance must provide balance and comfort, while the ritual of the ball must allow the player to come back to a loose, ready position and a state of relaxed concentration. First key point, the toss. The left arm tosses the ball smoothly, while the right arm, in a flowing pendulum swing, brings the racket head to the bent elbow position. At the same time, the body weight shifts from back to front leg. This bent elbow position is the second key point. The most favorable biomechanics position to produce an explosive serve include the racket held high, with the elbow at a right angle with the upper arm, and the lifting of the non-playing shoulder lengthening the line between both arms. Knees are bent only slightly. The third key point is the strike. It begins with the racket head dropping down behind the player's back, forming a loop. The racket head then strikes the ball at the highest point, driven by the elbow's forward projections and the acceleration created by the forearm and the wrist self-rotations. The body extension is amplified as legs stretch out. The last key point, the follow-through. It's the continuation of the hitting point. The shoulder passes through while the other arm moves downward, contributing to an upward and forward momentum which carries the server into the court. The correct rhythm in the connection of these key points determines the coordination and efficiency of the stroke. The movement is slow and relaxed until the bent elbow position, and then accelerates progressively until the racket head slams the ball like a whip. The serve is a very complicated movement, and it is therefore not surprising some young players need time to master the stroke. A frequent flaw is to rush the start of the movement without taking the time to breathe or decide on the strength and direction of the serve. This does not allow the player to discover the right rhythm. If the racket head is held too high at the start, it can hamper the racket's smooth pendulum swing, especially if the player uses a forehand grip. This is why the forehand grip for serving must be corrected as soon as possible, even though it appears to be a natural grip. The forehand grip creates an orientation of the racket face which does not permit an efficient loop in the back. The racket face comes up flat, which prohibits the rotation of the forearm and wrist at the hitting point. A more difficult error to detect takes place when the young player changes grip during the serve movement in order to find a more comfortable feeling. When in doubt, the grip should be checked at the end of the stroke. Despite a continental serve grip, the racket face often ends up flat just prior to hitting the ball, due to the lack of strength in the young player's wrist. The toss is easy to explain, but often difficult to implement. It requires a lot of practice to toss the ball accurately and consistently to the hitting point. If the ball is consistently tossed too low, or hit too low, too much to the left, or too much to the right, too far behind, or too far in front, the stroke cannot produce maximum power. Lifting the arms in a V shape, which is frequent among youngsters who are not yet coordinated, hinders the player from finding the ideal bent elbow position. Excessive arching of the back should be avoided to prevent long-term traumatism and spinal injuries. Hitting the ball while bending forward with your head lowered should also be discouraged. The tossing arm normally folds under the chest during the stroke, but coming down too soon can create an imbalance in the swing. On the other hand, if the tossing arm folds back, the shoulders will rotate prematurely, resulting in a weak hit. An incomplete or mistimed leg extension causes a breakdown in the upward and forward thrust of the upper body. Finally, we cannot underestimate the importance of self-confidence in executing a good serve. It's not uncommon to observe a strong quality movement on a first serve, followed by a tight or tentative second serve from fear of a double fault. Teaching the use of spins, slice, but especially topspins, is probably the best medicine to heal the double fault fear. By learning to convert some impact strength into a reliable spin by brushing the ball, youngsters also learn not to hold back their stroke. Under 12 is the ideal age for challenges, and it's the age to experiment. Good synchronization between the movements of arms and legs, when serving, as in the rest of the game, is not always easy to attain. Any good footwork is in fact characterized by an independence of the upper and lower body. Learning good footwork, such as dynamic, light readying steps, marked split steps, running to the ball, side steps, skip or cross steps, is the basis for future adult tennis. Good footwork includes any movement required to adapt to all game situations. Good footwork depends on staying alert. As soon as fatigue is present or concentration slacks off, passive and inadequate behavior follows, which do not allow the player to express all his or her technical strength. The ability to master adjustment steps, returns, clearing steps, light readying steps, sliding steps, skip or cross steps, transferring your weight. All this heightens the level of awareness and also improves the body's preparation for the shot, both in spacing and timing. In spacing, preparation is right when the leg you push off is at a distance from the ball, which allows you to strike the ball without compensation. Timing is correct when preparation is early enough to allow the weight shift from backward to forward at the hitting point. The ability to transfer all your body weight into the ball is the key to developing a powerful game. Footwork is therefore key to the effectiveness of all shots. It also helps discover the ideal shape and rhythm for the arm movement, and this is especially the case for inside-out forehands. Clearing steps allow the player to find the best upper body rotation to strike the ball with the maximum power. Teaching this unique footwork lets the player discover the full potential of the forehand. There is a close relationship between the grip and the stroke. Eastern grips or semi-Western grips are the most favorable to hit through the ball and produce a flat or topspin shot. These grips also facilitate the development of very efficient forehands and do not require major modifications for the volley game. Extreme Western grips ordinarily lead to rotational movements which generate strong spins. They allow particularly efficient forehands. Examples of these grips are found at the highest competitive level, and they should therefore not be forbidden. These rotational strokes are not very compatible with the volley game. They're sometimes so deeply rooted that the player has a lot of trouble even after modifying the grip to discover a simple, easy, and natural volley stroke. As soon as possible, the player thus comes back to his or her baseline forehand technique, for better or for worse. This is why you should be concerned about players locking too early into a limiting technique. Between Eastern and semi-Western grips, players should adopt a grip which allows the development of a more complete technique without excessive rotations. Whatever grip is chosen, the forehand must begin right away with an upper body rotation, and this is the second key point. This rotation initiates the forehand preparation and requires a good separation between the upper and lower body. The rotation takes place independent of the leg's position. The racket's take-back can be initiated with a convex motion or with a horizontal motion, or even with the elbow slightly away from the side. The rhythm of the take-back is critical and should not negatively impact the racket starting forward. It must take place early enough to avoid precipitating the stroke. In a good forehand, the take-back is often linked together with the strike by a loop of the racket. This loop places the racket head more or less below the ball, while it also increases the stroke speed. The impact point is the third key point. The racket face plane should not be behind the forward hip, but its exact position can vary based upon the grip chosen. The last key point is the follow-through. The strike quality is determined by how the racket controls the ball trajectory. Beginners most often discover the forehand movement first. It's a simple shot, or at least somewhat simple. However, you must watch out for poor forms, which provide temporary ease, but will be harmful to the future development of the forehand stroke. An open racket face at the end of the take-back tends to weaken the stroke. Likewise, a too long take-back can be dangerous if it's not flexible. A late forward swing leads to restricted shots, late hits, or mistimed shots. On the other hand, an early hit, or one that is too far forward, sometimes created by a premature upper body rotation, also prevents a good strike through the ball. Following through with the arm wrapped around the neck is a clear sign of these errors. While only a result, it invites you to look for the root of the problem. With adults, the service return is a good stroke to learn how to shorten one's motion based on the time available to hit the ball. With youngsters, even if the serve is not powerful enough to win the point, it's important to ensure they adopt a correct ready position. This forces the player to prepare mentally for the point to be played, and it focuses attention on overall readiness. The player must be able to switch instantly from a forehand to a backhand grip. This grip is the first key point of the one-handed backhand. The grip can vary based on the type of backhand to be played. Hammer grip for flat or sliced backhands, Eastern or semi-Western grip for a topspin backhand. The second key point is the racket position at the end of the backswing. In a topspin backhand, you lower the racket head below the point of impact in order to strike the ball coming through from bottom to top. This demands an early backswing to obtain a good rhythm in the movement, and also requires a firm wrist. On the other hand, in a sliced backhand, the racket head moves directly toward the ball. The sliced backhand is therefore above all a defensive shot because of the time saved by shortening the take-back. But it is also a very accurate shot, which will be very useful for attack strokes followed at the net. The impact point is the third key point. It obviously varies with the type of grip and therefore with the type of backhand played. Up until a few years ago, many under-12 players had only a sliced backhand. It's the easiest to execute, especially when there's little time. Nowadays, all have learned how to hit a topspin backhand. At the same time, they have acquired a large attack potential. Whether the backhand is sliced or topspin, the impact point is always clearly ahead of the player's hip. And if the follow-through changes with the backhand type, it's indicative of the strike quality. Many players keep the two-handed backhand with which they started to play when their muscles were still relatively weak and their ability to use their controlling hand not yet well defined. There's nothing wrong with that. Players with this backhand technique compete at the highest levels. However, some players gave up their two-handed backhand around 15 or 16 in order to reach their full potential. Stefan Edberg and Pete Sampras are among the most famous examples of these players. It's therefore around age 12 that you need to think of the future and choose the optimal type of backhand for the player's adult game. Natural two-handed backhands typically have a forehand grip for the controlling hand. It's the grip of players, and especially female players, who tend to be ambidextrous. With such a grip, they can have wonderful service returns. They develop and maintain an aggressive yet reliable baseline game. They use their wrists to hide their intention or to give spins, and can attempt winners as soon as they see an opening. But when they are forced to play a one-handed backhand because they're overwhelmed by the ball, their shot is weak because the grip is then less than ideal. For this reason, unless the two-handed backhand is naturally a winning shot, or unless the youngster is ambidextrous, you should consider it only a temporary technique. But if the young player is more skillful with his or her controlling hand than with the other, you should have him or her adopt a true backhand grip as soon as possible. At the right time, this grip will eventually allow the player an easy transition to a one-handed backhand. This is probably what happens in the two-handed backhand, where the second hand drops after the strike. In this case, it's urgent to change the grip to prepare for the conversion to the one-handed backhand. The two-handed backhand is launched by an upper body rotation, which must be in perfect timing with the striking of the ball in order to be efficient. When you try to hit the ball harder, this rotation sometimes takes place too early, and the shoulders are already parallel to the net prior to the strike. Setting the right foot parallel to the baseline forces the player to stiffen the leg. This especially should be corrected because it puts excessive torque on the front knee. Between extreme concave takebacks, or convex takebacks, one must think that an horizontal takeback with a small adjustment prior to the strike is the most efficient. However, you should be careful about trying to correct a two-handed backhand too much. It's above all a natural and individual shot, which should be kept only if its effectiveness is obvious from the youngest age. It's even more the case for a two-handed forehand, which is valuable only when executed by a true ambidextrous player. Two-handed shots are therefore based on a trunk rotation, which means that they do not naturally carry the player inside the court. Players who like the net often step forward into forehands or backhands. This approach technique requires the player to keep the trunk perpendicular to the net. Balance can then be recovered with a jump. Or a skip. Or cross steps. Young players love coming to the net, and you should not deprive them from practicing the volley, even though you realize it mostly represents an investment for the future. The common key point for all volleys is a specific ready position. Not too close to the net, knees slightly bent, elbows forward, racket head held slightly above the wrist level. This ready position must result in concentration as well as mental and physical readiness. This alertness is especially important because the ball arrives much faster than on the baseline. The second key point is the racket head orientation, along with a gentle pivoting of the trunk and only a slight takeback. The strike is the third key point. The racket hits the ball forward in order to cut the trajectory of the ball. The grip must be neutral or continental for a forehand volley. And it must be a backhand grip for the backhand volley, whether the volley is one-handed or two-handed. The fourth key point is the impact point. It takes place in a forward position. With such a forward angle, there's not much of a follow-through. To optimize learning, you should avoid stiff, ready positions. Unless you return to a relaxed, ready position after each shot, it's impossible to hit through each volley. Only dynamic footwork will allow the feeling of springing toward the ball. The overhead is used too little by young players in competition, and unfortunately is often perfected too late. A strong overhead requires good eye judgment and strong coordination, and you're better off mastering its rhythm sooner rather than later. The first key point of the overhead is footwork. It is essential for the player to learn how to wait for the lob at its drop point by turning and running back, using skip or cross steps, keeping his eye on the ball, his body sideways, and his arm bent in the elbow position. The second key point refers to a direct move to the bent elbow position. With one hand aiming at the ball and the other hand maintaining the racket head high, the arm is cocked and ready to be released. The ideal grip is the hammer grip. The third key point is the strike. The leg extension, which can lead to a jump to reach the ball at the highest point possible, must be timed perfectly with the arm fully extended at the impact point. The final key point is the follow-through. As in the serve, the racket finishes its follow-through on the opposite side while the body weight falls forward. Many under-12 players already have a fairly good technique. And even if their size does not yet allow them to reap the benefits in competition, their technical arsenal is ready to function. The important focus on under-12 competition results should not hinder the future development of young players' games. And that means allowing them to reach the peak of their personality. This will happen only if you give priority to the one critical aspect of tennis: having fun.